when you don't want to take it a hammer to it anyway. All right, so welcome this morning. Let's introduce our guest, an accomplished functional medicine practitioner, chiropractor, author, and lecturer who's an expert in resolving chronic illnesses such as metabolic disorders, diabetes, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and many more. It's a true pleasure to have you with us this morning, my friend, Dr. Anthony Talorico. How are you doing?
Hey, great. Thanks for having me on, Gabe.
Yeah, it's great to connect, man. So why don't you start out telling us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, I've been in practice since 1995. I went to Life College, undergrad at Rutgers University. My whole life, I was into, sports and performance and all that kind of stuff, just trying to, really trying to get the most out of what, God gives us. And that kind of led me into more holistic health because, we were big into supplementation and lifestyle, exercise, and that transition went from, oh, this is great for this subsect of people, but there's a whole group of people out there that are sick, that have all these health problems, and they don't know where to go. And so that led me towards natural health care because I felt like the knowledge I had already, taken in and implemented in my life was going to be relevant to a lot of other people.
Awesome. So that's kind of how you transitioned from athlete to functional medicine doctor, essentially.
Yeah, and just seeing. So I was driving my daughter home from a diving practice. So she was a competitive diver. She still is. And so I was driving back from Pitt, which is downtown Pittsburgh, and there was a sign. And the sign, it said 86 million people in the United States are pre-diabetic. And I was like, that can't be right. But it was. And not only that, the number has now been revised and updated, and it's over 100 million people. And as I thought about that, I realized a lot of those people were my family members, like my aunts, uncles, father, all had metabolic syndrome. And it just kind of spoke to me, and it just said, the way that this is being treated, handled, diagnosed is just missing the target completely.
So that's what's led you into this a little further, is having friends and family and loved ones that were pretty much falling down this same epidemic path?
Definitely. And then seeing my patient populations, more and more of this, and listening to their frustration and their stories about how they just don't get well, or they can't lose weight, or they just don't recover. And I was like, man, something is really wrong. Something is going on. And so that kind of led me to inquire further about, this whole thing about metabolism. And that's what drove me towards functional, because it's a different way of thinking and analyzing things. Because, you're not just treating sorry about that. You're not just treating a number, you're treating a person, and you're analyzing things from a 30,000 foot view rather than just a single number on a page. Oh, your glucose was 100, so you're fine, which we know is not the case.
Yeah. So what are some of the ways that people are being mismanaged, misdiagnosed, and misinformed about their conditions that you see in practice?
So it starts with day one. When a person goes to their primary doctor, they typically run two blood tests. They run, a glucose test and an HbA1c. And if those numbers fall into the established normals, they're pretty much told they're fine. But even just recently, the Journal of Endocrinology even published a study that said HbA1c can miss up to 70% of people who are pre-diabetic. So we're relying on these numbers that might not even tell the true story. So my workup is different. So when I see somebody, I run their insulin level in addition to their glucose levels and their HbA1c, and I also run triglycerides, because I want to know what the body is actually doing to maintain that sugar at that level, that HbA1c at that level. And that gives us a more functional perspective. So suddenly we go, okay, your glucose might be 100, but your insulin is like way up here. So we know they have insulin resistance, and that's the actual problem, rather than just a glucose number, like, oh, your glucose is 100 and you're fine. Go home and keep doing the same stuff that you've been doing. And so when we look at it in a more functional way, we realize, wow, this person, is sick. They haven't manifested all the symptoms yet, but they are sick. They have an ongoing metabolic issue. So,
yeah, that's where the importance of running the right testing helps out versus functional lab testing versus disease lab testing. Because some of the disease lab testing is they watch and wait, essentially.
Right.
Just like you're mentioning, they say, everything looks normal, so we'll run this again in 6 months. We'll run this again in maybe a year, and just kind of watch and wait. And that's kind of a very devastating, destructive pattern to get in, because why wait until they get into a more chronic problem versus trying to change something right away, like getting their insulin, insulin sensitivity a little bit more managed.
Absolutely. That and the only thing that's more damaging than that is after they're diagnosed, the total focus goes on glucose and medication. So for example, they'll say, all right, so you have to take metformin or whatever you're going to take. So you have to eat this many carbohydrates during the course of the day because you're going to take medication. And yeah, I see the look on your face. I'm saying, let's throw that whole thing. Let's get rid of that whole thing. Let's skip that altogether, because that's just going to take us further down the road to damage and destruction. And so they even do this with people who are on insulin. So if you're on insulin, you can, eat a bad meal and then sweep it under the rug with insulin, thinking that that's a wash because my sugar didn't go up too high. But in reality, insulin can be very destructive on its own. Insulin is 50% of this equation because it's an anabolic hormone, which means it's building up muscles and fat and all that, but it's also causing growth of the lining inside of the artery. So it's making that artery, the lumen of the artery, get smaller by anabolic process. So they get hypertension, they get heart disease. And insulin can fuel growth of cancer because a lot of cancerous cells have an enormous amount of insulin receptors. So just hammering people with insulin is a big part of the problem and the disease process that we have nowadays.
Yeah, and insulin itself is a messenger, and what it really says is store fat, don't burn muscle at all.
Right. And so people, when they have this high fasting insulin level, we know that they have metabolic syndrome already. They're just not clinically diagnosed. So it's the canary in the coal mine. And people fight all the time about this, because their doctors will say, well, you don't need that test. And I'll be like, why not? I mean, it's not an expensive test. It's not an elaborate test. It's just, you're already getting your blood drawn. Add that in. And so in 2018, I spent, a good part of the year writing a book. And the book is basically, it's called Metabolic Programming. And basically it's about this stuff, but also the fact that our DNA was carefully curated over thousands of years to survive in an entirely different environment that we have now. Like Joe Caveman didn't have a TV, a refrigerator, heat, access to food whenever they wanted. So that DNA that allowed us to survive through that harsh circumstances is the same DNA that's in us now. And yet most of us walk around in, a comfortable 70-degree bubble. We don't have to worry about those stresses. We have ample food. We have way too much food. And we have sleep problems, we have circadian mismatch, we have EMF, blue light. We've got bombarded with all of these things that our DNA was never set up to survive. And that's why we're developing metabolic disease and cancer at the rate that we are.
Yeah, the amount of sugar tremendously has changed, and our food really, it's difficult to even call it food anymore. It's all
Right.
technologically manipulated, manufactured, processed. And again, like our ancestors with, when we were caveman Joe, they didn't have sugar. They'd have
No.
berries, maybe some really
Right.
sour tart fruit.
Right.
And the rare occasion they would come across a honeycomb.
Honey is exactly it. And what would they do when they came across it?
Just consume it, because
As
it was
much as possible, right? Yeah. And that's in the DNA. That's a survival mechanism. So every time you open your cupboard, if you have Twinkies, Ho-Hos, gummy bears, and chips there, you're going to be drawn to consuming it. It's just part of what allowed us to survive through, scarcity. When we look at it in a physiological sense, you have 4 hormones that can elevate blood sugar, but only one that lowers it. So what from an evolutionary standpoint was more important, to raise your sugar or lower it? Well, to raise it, because we only have one real storage hormone, but we have 4 things that can liberate energy and get us moving. So we were designed to survive from fat supply, from storage, from and in the times of famine, very, very efficiently. And now we have the absolute opposite. We have abundance, and it's killing us. And our newest generation of people who are sick are kids. So if we think 100 million people, that's 1 in 3. A lot of those are children.
Yeah. And the amount of chronic illness in children today is downright frightening. In 1945, 4% of the entire population had chronic illness. And now in 2015 alone, 46% of children alone have chronic illness. So we are losing ground substantially.
Yeah. And the thing is, nobody's talking about it. It doesn't make the news. It's not sensational. It's not Ebola. It's not Zika. You're not going to turn on your news and hear about metabolic syndrome, but 1 in 3 people that you see have it. So one day I was flying home from a Health Experts Alliance in Atlanta, and I'm in the airport, and there's all these people there, and I'm thinking to myself, 1 in 3 people that I'm seeing, that I'm laying my eyes on, has metabolic syndrome, and they probably don't know it. So it's an epidemic of really staggering proportion, and we're just not addressing it, and we're not doing the right things when it presents itself.
Yeah. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you see? And on that note, okay, the food triggers, you talked about having these potential accidents in your cabinets and things like that. Right. You got to really be aware and even hyper conscious of the people that run the food manufacturers are completely aware of these triggers. That's why you go into a store. It's why you drive by a Burger King and you can just smell the triggers. So it's important to be aware of those triggers and avoid those. In the stores, the aisles that are going to trigger that survival mechanism are going to have the brightest colors and be the biggest labels and all that. So you got to really be aware that it's a trap every time you go to the grocery store, and you want to be very aware that these foods will cause you problems, and they're manufactured and they're marketed to consumers at an alarming rate. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you see with people trying to improve their own health?
Well, I think the big thing is they're focused so much on single factors. Like, okay, I'm just not going to eat carbohydrates. That's all I'm going to do. And the other factors kind of get swept under the rug. Yeah, diet is really important. It's a big part of this. But so is, for example, the amount of sleep that you get. So if you ignore that, if you're in a circadian mismatch where you're getting bombarded with blue light all day, and then you go to bed and you're not sleeping well. One night of poor sleep can cause up to 50% insulin resistance the following day. And you think, yeah, it's staggering. And what if you do that 4 or 5 nights a week? What do you think is going to happen? Well, you're going to develop metabolic syndrome. And then there's medications. So beta blockers, other antihypertensives, statin drugs, antipsychotics, antidepressive medications. These have all been shown to cause metabolic syndrome too. How many people are taking those? You know, right.
And then you add in that if you take more than one drug, you're not doing any kind of evidence-based medicine. You're officially an experiment, because they can't measure drugs that way. They'll measure one drug and one variable. They can't measure 2 to 3, and maybe your average geriatric patient's on 10 to 12 medications.
Oh, it's polypharmacy, is ridiculous now. And so, what we're looking at is a population of patients that never existed before. Every time somebody comes in, it's a new set of things, and their primary mode of treatment, their primary care physicians, they just simply don't have time to adequately educate and go through all of these processes. So when I was at this conference, I was talking to a couple of family docs, and they said, I have about 5 to 6 minutes to see that person. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a prescription or two, and I'm going to hope that gets it done. And that's the truth. So I don't blame them. It's not their fault, but there needs to be an evolution in the thinking and the paradigm of, or we're going to just continue to go the direction that we're going. We're accelerating downhill, and we're going to keep going that way unless things change. They have to change up here. And then changes will begin to permeate through, and you'll see changes of the way things are managed.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think that in order for people to really understand how bad it is, it has to change up here. And what I see in my experience is so many people today are stressed out. They're stressed about finances. They're stressed about their jobs. They're stressed about maybe their health challenges of either themselves or their family members or even their children. And this causes them to lose a lot of sleep. Mm-hmm. So the next thing in the morning, what they'll do is they'll usually grab a toxic coffee or a toxic energy drink of some sort to stimulate them and make them able to go through the day. Right. The problem with all these medications and with the toxins and the things that you even mentioned, the antidepressants, antihistamines, all of those things, is they automatically trigger the body into a fight or flight state. And what happens is there's a shifting in your brain from your human brain, which your problem solving and your logics and everything else is taken care of. You shift to this more primitive brain back here, and they're incapable of listening. They cannot have a conversation to save their life. You could tell them, you keep eating this and it's going to kill you. It's going to kill you slowly, and you're going to have $100,000 worth of medical bills. And they're like, wow, this is pretty devastating. I want to get this changed. And by the time they get to their car, they can't remember anything you told them.
Right.
So I think to get the message to people, we've got to get them unsedated and grounded to where they can really start to see the destructive path that we're on.
And a lot of people are paying attention to stuff like what we're doing. One of my patients saw something and he said, hey, this might be me. And so he had me work him up. And when I worked him up, he was a full-on type 2 diabetic. Blood sugar, fasting blood sugar was 253. His insulin was 10. His HbA1c was 10. And I said, look, man, if you went anywhere else, you'd be put on several drugs and sent on your way. And he said, well, I'm not looking for that. I want to try to fix it. So he went to work. I mean, he really went to work. 90 days later, he no longer met the status of type 2 diabetes. His insulin went down to 4. His HbA1c went down to 6. It still has room to go. And his fasting glucose went down to 112. all in 90 days by doing the right things, no medication, not a single medication. And I told him, I said, you're an A+ student because you were willing to implement everything that I said. And what he told me was, I was desperate, like, and I'm hoping that we don't have to get to that place with everybody, that we don't have to get them desperate, and the side effect of him doing this stuff and getting his metabolism working right, he dropped 30 pounds of body fat and his eyesight changed. So he was telling me one day, he said, I was in church and I had to mess around with my glasses because suddenly, like, they didn't work. And I was like, yeah, that's your eyes, your focus is changing. You're changing the cells and structure of your body. So you're going to regain some of the vision that you've lost over the years rather insidiously. And he's like blown away by it. So, and I'm seeing this more and more. I just wish more people were aware of it, like that they understood the dire consequences and they were willing to, implement things that could really help them change their lives. Yeah.
And also improving those numbers in that guy, improving his eyesight. I bet you did a number for his sleep too. I bet he gets way deeper sleep because your blood sugar has a lot to do with how well you sleep.
Oh yeah. It's hugely connected. This whole circadian rhythm that orients a human to the planet is been built in over hundreds of thousands of years. The sun matters to us. I mean, we've been conditioned to fear it, but our DNA, everything that makes us human is partly to do with that.
Oh, and, absolutely.
Yeah, we're so disconnected from the earth, from the sun, that's part of our problem.
Absolutely. That's what I tell people a lot of times is they're deficient in nature. That's the bottom line. And there are some pretty simple solutions that I've found that we can get people back in touch with nature pretty passively and pretty cost effectively. But yeah, essentially we're ambient sunshine, and we have to eat. We have to eat the sunshine in our foods, in our plants, and our things like that. And, these manufactured processed foods just don't have the information. And that's essentially what food is.
Yeah.
Is information. It tells your body how to behave.
Yeah, I call it, in my book, I call them instructions. I say all of these things that we do are instructions. The amount of sleep we get, the amount of light that hits our skin, the temperature that we are around, the sounds, the visuals, the foods we take in, the drink, the thoughts we have, they're all instructions, and they're telling our body what to do. Okay, so if all of our instructions say, you need to go off this path of disease and sickness, we'll do that because we're programming that's what the programming part of what I do is. It's called metabolic programming for a reason, because it's the sum total of all of the instructions that we're giving ourselves. So we need to learn just exactly what you're saying. We need to learn how to give better instructions, and then we'll have a better result.
Yeah. Awesome. So is that kind of, what do you think makes your approach a little differently than, getting these things resolved that stumps conventional medical doctors? What makes your approach a little different?
Well, I think it's because of my view. So I'll do that 30,000-foot view, and I'll dig into things like their sleep habits, their meal habits and things. I'm not a big person on counting calories, but calories do count, and where those calories come from count. So they're not all created equal. So I'll talk to them about food, and I'll have them food journal. One of the things I'm always surprised about, and I've been a victim of this myself, is I think I ate X amount of calories, maybe 2,000. And then if you really look at it, it's probably 3,000. You underestimate all the time. And it's not that big a deal if your metabolism is healthy. But when your metabolism is sick, that is a big deal. That really pushes you in the direction of sickness. So we all know people who can seemingly eat whatever they want and never gain a pound. Well, they're the metabolically gifted. Then there's everybody else, right? And, you know, my family, we were not the metabolically gifted. So there were a lot of heavy people eating a lot of bad food all the time. And as a result, they were all type 2 diabetics. And their way of handling their bad meal, their bad decision, was to take extra insulin. And I was like, no, that's not how this is supposed to work, you know? So my approach is to really look at getting sensitivity turned on by all the things that we've talked about, you know, getting them sleeping properly, you know, doing silly things like lowering the temperature in their room when they're sleeping. You know, that causes a change in your metabolism. That causes you to use more brown adipose tissue. It's metabolically active. It signals your brain to heal and sleep better. And so there's just simple things you can do. And then there's the more complex. That's like the fasting, intermittent fasting, food sources, nutrients, supplements, all of those other things play a role. And that combined approach is what gets people well, just beyond numbers on a page. They can just tell you, they say, hey, doc, I haven't felt this good in 20 years. And, you know, you're like, you know, I could go all day on a couple of those. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is. It's much better having them show you the changes that they're feeling and the energy changes they're feeling and the clarity of thoughts, the loss of brain fog, the loss of neuropathy, you know, no more waking up between 1 and 3 at night. All of those things start to improve. And when you see it on a blood test, that's one thing, but having the patient tell you their life's changes is a completely different thing. So It's incredible.
Right.
Speaking of this, you kind of brought it up a couple of times now about your family and things like that. Just for our listeners out there, what role how much of a role does genetics play in a person's ability to lose weight?
I think it plays a role. So, you know, our genes are kind of set up to allow us to survive. That's what they are. But, you know, certain people have different enzymatic systems that are inherited. But they also have a lot of the same habits. So if you come up in a family and your habit was that you ate, you know, pancakes and, you know, whatever for breakfast, and you drank Kool-Aid all day, and you had, you know, plenty of stuff around, you're going to take those habits with you. And so there is a genetic predisposition, but it's not everything. I would say that it's like anything else. It puts a bullet in the chamber, but it doesn't pull the trigger. So we know as we learn more, we learn about different hormones, things like leptin and ghrelin and adiponectin and irisin and all of these other things. And we know that some of these pathways might be inherited, but you still have to turn the key and unlock that by behavior and habit. And so we'll see people that get great results. And my opinion, my approach is always, let's help you get to the best you can be, and not worry about the metabolically gifted person or the person who's artificially enhanced that's on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. It's the comparison that causes problems. So if I can get somebody, you know, super healthy for them, the best they've ever been, and that's not what society says is perfect, but they're really good, that's a home run. You know, that's a big home run.
Absolutely. Why don't you share with us a story of one of the most surprising or amazing weight loss stories that you've had in practice?
Well, I had a guy, super great guy, but he was, you know, we'd treat him and he would just seemingly never get better. And I said, I think the problem is your body is just making way too much inflammation. So it's the combination of diet, lifestyle. And I think we should approach this not as so much as a weight loss approach, but maybe it's just a total health approach. So in the beginning, he was taking 2,400 milligrams of ibuprofen every single day of his life. Yeah, that much. Because neurosurgeons said that that's how much he could take. So that's what he was taking. That was just to manage his day. And he wasn't like super active and doing a lot of things. So I said, I think if we can get this under control, that's going to go bye-bye. So in about 4 months' time, he dropped 70 pounds and all of the ibuprofen. Gone. Didn't need it anymore. And then he said, I actually feel like now I can exercise. Like I can actually go and, but before he couldn't. So he's a great example of somebody who just, lit it up. And it was not that hard for him. In fact, I have a testimonial of him saying it was the best thing he's ever did, and it wasn't that hard. But it's just making the right. It's like, you ever hear that story about the guy, he hires this guy to fix this submarine, and nobody can fix it, and they find this guy, and he's retired, he's 80 years old, and then they say, okay, well, we don't know anybody else. And he comes in with his wrench and he just taps this thing, and all of a sudden the motor comes to life. He sends them a bill for $10,000. And he said, $10,000, you were only there for a minute. He said, well, you're not paying for my time. You're paying for my expertise. And since nobody else had it, I can charge a premium for it. So it's about the tweaks. It's about taking that wrench and hitting that person in the right place. Tapping that one thing that initiates health, that instead of thinking about treating a weight problem, we're going to think about making this person healthier so that the body begins to naturally lose the weight. And as well as I do that fat is a big repository for toxins. So as you're getting rid of that body fat, you're also liberating a lot of toxins, and that also makes you healthier. It's just an amazing process to see.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the biggest contributors to why, now we're at 1 out of 3 people will be have diabetes or be obese by the time they're in college. 1 out of 3 people today, and I think it's not due to a lack of trying, because a lot of people are trying to eat better. They're trying to be more active. They're trying to lose weight. I mean, you see people all the time paying money to go to gyms and do this and that, even maybe getting personal trainers.
Right.
But I think the largest overlooked factor in that is that people are chronically stressed, they're chronically inflamed, and they're chronically toxic. And when you have those 3 components going on, it's going to be impossible to really get the weight loss changes that you're looking for. Especially trying the methods that you can read about in like Men's Health magazines, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really an epidemic. It really is. And even though it seems unusual for us to be involved in this, it's a big part of the people that walk in our door every day. And if you attach monetary numbers to it, it will eclipse every other health problem by far. It could be $1 trillion health crisis in America alone. So that's 100 million people. It costs on average between $500 and $1,000 a month to put a type 2 diabetic on insulin. So if you think about that, if I'm using $1,000 worth of insulin a month, which I shouldn't be on anyway, I mean, I shouldn't get there. That shouldn't happen, but it does. So if I'm using $1,000 worth of insulin a month, that's $12,000 a year times 100 million people. It's $1.2 trillion. So as I sat down and looked at that, I started putting pen to paper. I said, we can't afford this. I mean, we just can't. It'll bankrupt all of healthcare. Everything that will happen in healthcare is going to be driven towards handling people with a treatable, curable condition called metabolic syndrome. And that's what kind of motivated me to do the things that I've done and implement the things and write the book and do all that stuff.
Excellent. I really appreciate your hard work, because you hit on a very valuable point. I lectured to some doctors this last weekend, and what I shared with them was our numbers, our current numbers of where we are and where we're headed, with 1 out of 36 children being autistic, 1 out of 8, and I would even argue maybe even 1 out of 6 with some kind of attention deficit problem, 1 out of 4 with an allergy, 1 out of 10 with asthma, 1 out of 3 diabetic by college, 1 out of 3 obese by the time they're in college. 1 out of 2 Americans today have major depression. 1 out of 2 Americans will be diagnosed with cancer before they die, and now dementia has affected the entire population. And I said, with these kind of numbers going on, this is no longer about functional medicine. This is no longer about, vaccines. This is no longer about, what doctors write for you or this or that. This is about finance, because there's not an economic structure in existence that can handle this level of chronic inflammation and chronic disease.
Right.
And we've got to think of a cost-effective, simple way to reach these people and stop this trajectory of where we're going.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why doing the stuff that you're doing, the interviews and these things are so important, because somebody's going to see this and they're going to say, that might be me. I need to find out about this. I need to investigate, or this might be my child, my 13-year-old is, not very sedentary, and he eats a lot of, bad food, and he's drinking sports drinks and Gatorade all day. And, it's the perfect formula for creating disease. And without the awareness, we're going to struggle. So the more awareness, the more information we can put out, and, just the work in this space is going to be, huge for helping people improve the trajectory of their lives and their health.
Yeah. So what is reaching, when you're working with patients, reaching their fullest potential, what does that mean to you?
I think for me, that just means having them be the best you can be, and that doesn't mean you have to have, 6-pack abs and, be, Adonis on the beach. But it means that you have the energy to get up and play with your kids, that you can make it through a work day without being exhausted, passing out at your desk, that you can go to bed and sleep and have a restful night of sleep, that you have the energy to do everything that you want to do without being in terrible pain, having all of your joints ache, and being just a physical wreck at middle age, when this is not how we were designed to live. I just strongly feel like we were engineered to live a healthy life, and we've gone so far astray that we're not living to our potential. And your potential might not be to run marathons or, squat 400 pounds, but whatever that is, I want you to be able to reach it. And I sometimes, I ran into a guy I hadn't seen in about 15 years at the Pitt had the NCAA wrestling tournament this year, and I'm a big wrestling fan. I was a coach and a wrestler. And he said to me, "Hey, Doc, man, you look the same that you did like 15 years ago." And I thought, well, you know what? I don't have any magic. There's no secrets. Like, it's just habits and behaviors. So if we can get people to change their habits and behaviors that move more away from sickness and towards health, then that's what reaching that potential is about to me. Just getting people at their best them that they can possibly be.
Awesome. And you're right. We are meant for so much more. I witnessed a guy in the Okinawan Islands a long time ago, 105 years old, sprawl onto a horse and ride around cutting coconuts out of a tree with a machete in his hand.
That's amazing.
He did it flawlessly with a big smile on his face. And that is truly living, and I don't think the guy went to the gym. He didn't squat.
Yeah.
He had a shirt on, so I didn't see if he had abs or anything like that. But I think what was really important was the community he was in, the available nutrition that he had, and again, the feeling of belonging with healthy relationships around him was I think,
right.
one of the top things in the list. And it was just phenomenal to see that. And then, here in America, we have people, that's a good point you brought up just now, because I've seen people that I haven't seen in a few years, and it looks like they've aged 5 years in just a few years. And,
right.
and there's really something devastating going on in our country. And we've got to try to get a handle on this and reach the people that want to get better. I don't think we need more doctors. I think what we need are more people that are willing to do the changes necessary to get their health back.
Right. right. It would be great to have everybody pulling on the same side of the rope, you know, like
Yeah.
instead of having the resistance that we have among us and our patients, but also among other physicians of different types, you know, where we're spending too much time butting heads when we could be all pulling in the same direction, getting a person along the lines towards health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how can people get a hold of you? What's the best way for people to reach you?
There's a lot of different ways. I have a couple of groups on Facebook. If they just go Dr. Anthony Talorico on Facebook or YouTube, there's about, I don't know, maybe 10,000 people in one of my groups. That's just Dr. Anthony Talorico. The metabolism people especially can wind up, I have a group called Metabolic Programming, and I have to approve people to come into there. It's a small, cohesive group where I give a lot of information, very detailed information, and it might not be interesting to everybody, but if this is an issue that you're concerned about, you know, metabolic programming, you look up on Facebook. And then I have a webpage that's www.metabolicprogramming.com, and that's just kind of a landing page for people to come in and try to get more information about that. And then hopefully this book will be finished being edited, and I will get it out and probably publish directly to Amazon and make it affordable so I can get it in people's hands very quickly. Because it's not about making money, it's about changing lives. And so that's a big mission for me, is to really change people's lives and change the trajectory of their health.
Awesome. I can't wait to get a copy of that book myself. I'd like an autographed copy if that's possible as well.
I'll definitely autograph it for you. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Anthony, it's been a pleasure having you on today, man. I really appreciate the time and the expertise and the knowledge you shared with us today. We'll keep in touch, okay?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, likewise. Well, you enjoy the rest of your day, man, all right?
All right, you too. Take care.